Check, 1, 2.
One, two, three.
Welcome to Pièce de Résistance, a show about the geopolitical stakes of a world in turmoil. I'm your host, Stan Vojevodsky. As tensions rise in the Western Hemisphere between Washington, D.C. and Caracas, and the European theater approaches a possible climax on a resolution or escalation of the war in Ukraine, the world seems to be holding its breath as we enter into this festive Christmas season. The Western Hemisphere, on the one hand, wonders if it is a blessing or a curse to be in the sphere of influence of the United States. And European capitals are struggling to make sense of their new relationships to Washington, D.C. and the Trump administration. Even more so, since the recently published National Security Strategy came out earlier this month, completely upending decades of security alignments. Words like betrayal, appeasement, retreat are uttered in the hallways of European capitals like never before in our lifetime. What are the consequences for our world, for peace on the European continent, for the transatlantic relation, and Washington's relation to the Western Hemisphere? To try and understand some of those seismic fault lines and anticipate what 2026 onwards may bring for our societies, I welcome into the geopolitical bunker 4-star General Wesley Clark, former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, former Commander of US Southcom, and candidate for the 2004 Presidential Democratic Party primaries. Raised in the American heartland of Little Rock, Arkansas, graduated as valedictorian of the prestigious West Point Academy in 1966, awarded a Rhodes Scholarship at the University of Oxford, where he obtained a degree in philosophy, politics, and economics. He then went on to graduate from Commandant General Staff College with a master's degree in military science. Shot 4 times during the Vietnam War while commanding the A Company, 1st Battalion, 63rd Armored 25th Infantry Division, at which time he received a Silver Star for gallantry in combat. Recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom and a long list of distinctions, too long perhaps to list here today. His breadth of leadership in combat and commanding the North Atlantic Treaty Organization during the wars in the Balkans in the late 90s will be invaluable to our viewers to explain the dangerous world we live in currently and how these changes may impact us all. General Clark, good morning, and thank you, sir, for joining us in the Geopolitical Bunker by video conference today. It's great to see you again and welcome you to this new show about the geopolitical stakes of a world in turmoil.
All right. Well, thank you, Stan. Nice to be with you.
Thank you. You are, sir, a veteran of the Vietnam War, a decorated one, I should add. And so I will start our interview with a quote that is often attributed to Dr. Henry Kissinger, perhaps wrongfully so, during the Vietnam years. I quote, "The word will go out to the nations of the world that it may be dangerous to be America's enemy, but to be America's friend is fatal." Would you say this quote is accurate in today's world and perhaps as it relates specifically to the war in Ukraine?
Well, that's certainly the danger. The United States has a long tendency to put pressure on those that are most reliant on it. When it wants something done, it squeezes its friends when it cannot squeeze its adversaries. And this is precisely what Kissinger's talking about, and he did it. He's the one who did it. He cut the secret agreement with the North Vietnamese in 1971 that said, you can keep your troops in the South after the ceasefire. And no one knew about that. The Army was still doing its best to clear people out, and there was a big offensive in 1972 by the North Vietnamese that was beaten back by the remaining Army brigade, and it stayed there in the South. Some of my friends were engaged in that fight. And then President Nixon launched the Christmas bombing raids on on North Vietnam and specifically on Haiphong Harbor and on Hanoi with B-52s when the North Vietnamese stubbornly wouldn't comply, wouldn't close on a peace treaty that gave us an honorable exit. But we finally got that treaty. We squeezed the South Vietnamese president, told him he had no choice but to sign it. He said, "Look, you're gonna leave the North Vietnamese forces in my country. It's gonna destroy my country." The United States said, "Don't worry, we'll be there to help you if something goes wrong." But we weren't. And President Thieu was right. His country was destroyed.
Thank you, sir. You commended NATO over the first round of expansion of the alliance, with Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic joining between 1997 and 1999. We understand the concerns of former Soviet-occupied Eastern European nations to hedge their security against the resurgence of an expansionist Russia. What was NATO's policy back then towards Ukraine? Was it understood as a red line not to cross, or was Ukraine's accession to NATO already in play? And if not, what might have fundamentally changed and moved the cursor for successive U.S. administrations?
It was recognized in the mid-90s that Ukraine was a special case because in 1994 they gave up their nuclear weapons and, under pressure from us, by the way, gave them back to the successor state, which was Russia. And in return, they received a pledge from us, not a legally binding pledge, but a pledge that, and from Russia and the UK, that their borders, their sovereignty would be respected. And it was a pledge that implied that if it wasn't respected, there'd be a military response. It just wasn't legal that way. Like, it wasn't a legal treaty. It was an executive branch agreement. And so when it came time for NATO expansion, we took account of Russia. We actually said, and this is Deputy Secretary of State Strobe Talbot, who said on a couple of occasions that maybe Russia could sometimes at some point become a member of NATO if they were a democracy. They have to meet the standards. We had some special criteria we set up for NATO membership: secure borders, you have to be a democracy, et cetera, et cetera. And so we recognized we needed a special consultative arrangement with Russia. We did the same for Ukraine. Because Ukraine had voted with an overwhelming majority in 1991 to become independent of the Soviet Union and to break away from Russia. So both Ukraine and Russia had special opportunities to participate in consultations with the North Atlantic Council. And this was done at the defense and state ministerials every year, and at the summit it could be done. But it was mostly at the ministerial level twice a year.
I have to thank you. You've actually beat me to my next question, but I'll ask it nonetheless. In 2022, in the first days of the Russian aggression in Ukraine, President Putin gave a televised address and mentioned a conversation he had with President Clinton in 2000, in which he asked the latter if the United States would consider incorporating Russia into NATO now that the Cold War was over. You and I have heard President Clinton in recent discussions about Ukraine say he was the one who asked Putin potentially to join NATO, and in both cases, each said the other ignored the offer. Yet President Clinton spoke of Putin as a cunning leader, but someone who had always kept his word during the years they worked together. I'm not going to ask you who you believe asked whom. I think I know the answer. However, I do want to ask you what Europe would look like today had Russia been allowed to join NATO 25 years ago, and would the risk of conflict on the European continent be heightened or reduced?
Well, Stan, it wasn't that Russia wasn't allowed to join NATO. Russia didn't want to join NATO. In November of 1999, when Vladimir Putin was the prime minister, but not yet the president, he attended the inauguration in Ukraine of President Kuchma. And at that meeting, or at that inauguration, he said, "Russia and Ukraine are more than brothers. We are in each other's souls." A week later, a man from Poland came to see me. He was a national security advisor, and he said, "This speech indicates that Vladimir Putin, if he becomes president, he will press for the reacquisition of Ukraine and all of the Warsaw Pact countries under Russian control. He said the Russians are already trying to subvert, and in Poland, they're trying to take over our electricity grid so they can control the country, et cetera, et cetera. I heard all this in November of 1999. And this was after the point at which Putin, as prime minister, had apparently used his intelligence agents to blow up 3 Moscow apartment buildings. It was blamed on the Chechens, but at one point, people became so concerned that they began to search their buildings, and in one building, the residents found explosives. They called the police, and the police said, "Oh my goodness, thank you very much for finding these explosives. It was just a test. It was our explosives, of course, but this was just a civil preparedness test, but thank you very much." And it's like many things that happen. You're not there on the ground with the right authorities. You can't definitively prove who did it, but I think the general consensus is that Putin blamed the Chechens for these blasts in these apartment buildings that killed a number of people in Moscow, and then used that as a pretext to reattack Chechnya, and then use that to show how strong he was and be elected president. He did some cunning maneuvers behind the scenes with Yeltsin. He promised Yeltsin and his family they'd have immunity from any problems they had. There was a lot of friction and allegations of corruption. Putin controlled the KGB. He was running against a man named Yevgeny Primakov, who was also a KGB agent, but an older man. And Primakov had been, he was the foreign minister after he rehabilitated himself in the late 90s. But he was the man who, in the 1960s, actually worked with Yasser Arafat to start the Palestinian terror movement that infected the Middle East. And that was Yevgeny Primakov. So there's a long list of troubled, bad people inside Russia. It wasn't that we prevented Russia from joining NATO. They had no intention of joining NATO. They wanted to work against NATO.
Thank you, General. I want to bring up a little bit about the Articles 4 and 5 within the NATO Charter. Article 5 was only invoked once on the heels of 9/11. Article 4, on the other hand, was invoked 9 times, 6 of which were in the last 11 years, 5 times by Turkey, 4 times by Poland, one of those times with a couple of other neighboring countries. When the Nord Stream explosion happened, many capitals in NATO countries and mainstream media either implied or directly accused Russia for being behind such sabotage, with the consequences it had on Germany's economy and on the climate, with these hundreds of thousands of tons of methane spewing into European sky. Why then was Article 4, in your view, not invoked in the immediate aftermath? And if it became clear, as the investigation seems to be pointing, that Ukraine may or may not be behind it, should Ukraine be compelled to pay reparations to Germany, as Russia is being asked to do so with Ukraine and its reconstruction?
Well, first of all, I wasn't in a position to really have any insider knowledge on any of this. So as to why Article 4 wasn't invoked, you have to explain what Article 4 is, Stan. That's the right for consultation. So any member nation can ask NATO to have a special session where it can explain what its concerns are. So no, I don't know why it wasn't invoked. And look, we don't know who did it. Some people said Ukraine did it. Some people say other people did it. Some people still say Russia did it. So no, I don't think there need to be any reparations paid for Germany, because I don't think Germany, first of all, it was a mistake to have the Nord Stream pipeline put in the first place. And Nord Stream 2 was a deeper mistake. And let's just go into the details here. Back in 2010, 2011, the United States looked at China, that it was a very rapidly growing country. The Southeast Asia tiger economies were booming. And the United States said, well, In the aftermath of the Great Recession, and look at the struggles going on in Europe, and Europe is under austerity, and China's come out of this recession. They're booming, and wow, we need to focus more on the Pacific, and not on Europe. And so there was what was known as a pivot. It was announced with some fanfare. It was as though people in the American administration at the time said, hey, we got to do something different. Europe's old. Southeast Asia's new. Let's go to Southeast Asia. And we announced a pivot by telling the world that we were going to put 2,000 U.S. Marines in Australia to guard against China. Now, the distance between their base in Australia and China is several thousand miles. So, and 2,000 Marines against China? Oh, come on, give me a break. What was this about? And so it couldn't have been handled any more clumsily than this. And at the same time, Europe was struggling under austerity. We had tried to persuade the Europeans to really create a central bank when they created the Eurozone and when they went to a common currency. But if you don't have a common fiscal policy that can distribute and so forth, but no, they didn't want to do that. They said the Greeks were corrupt, and if you give money to Greece, blah, 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 blah. And we, at the same time, were dealing with the aftermath of our invasion of Iraq. There were massive dislocations caused by the Arab Spring. The United States was all in favor of the Arab Spring. Oh, let's bring freedom. But when it came to dealing with the consequences, we weren't very helpful to Europe. By 2013, 2014, 2015, we should have invoked NATO to help these European countries deal with massive refugee flows coming across the Mediterranean. And those refugee flows and migrants have had a profound impact on European security, on European politics, and on transatlantic relations. We turned our back on them. We did. And at the same time, President Obama had made a pledge in 2007 in Israel that he wouldn't allow the Iranians to get a nuclear weapon. And so there were secret negotiations that began in 2009, led by Jake Sullivan, with Iran to try to establish a reason, a way to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. And the United States decided in its wisdom, as it always does, can't we, Russia's a big country. Can't we work with Russia? We all love Dostoevsky. We've all read about, Dostoevsky. We know Russian movies that Tchaikovsky is wonderful, blah, 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 blah. And it's so romantic. It's snowy, it's dark, they're on sleds, the taiga. It's so romantic, and it would be wonderful. Two big countries, both nuclear powered. I'm sure we can get along. This was done by Clinton with Yeltsin. It was done by Bush, George W. Bush, who said he could see into Putin's soul. It was tried again in a reset that was improperly labeled by the first Obama administration. And here we were, worried about the Middle East, bringing in Vladimir Putin and Russia into the Middle East. And after President Obama said he was going to bomb Syria in 2013, if they used chemical weapons, they used chemical weapons. He then had a real streak of reflection in the Rose Garden that was very public and said, no, I don't think so. And Putin stepped up and said, we'll take care of that chemical stuff. And of course, we're going to have to come back in with our forces and everything. But, we can work with the Americans. And so there we were making friends with Russia. At the same time, the Ukrainians were struggling to escape the grip of Russian corruption and establish a real democracy. And that's the story of Eastern Europe. And when they called on us in the aftermath of the demonstrations in Maidan, when they asked the United States, what are we going to do? These Russians are invading Crimea. That's our territory. You said you'd help us. What we told them is, let them have it. And we'll do something diplomatically. That was the answer of the United States government. We did not follow through on the pledge that was given in 1994. We did not stand up for Ukraine's sovereignty. Instead, we shoved them under the bus. We said, don't worry about it. Look, the Ukrainians actually had those little green men in their sights. They actually called and asked for advice. Well, you said you were going to help us. The United States, you're supposed to be our friend. And we told them, give up Crimea. I know, because I was there on the 31st of March. And on the 1st of April, I met with the Minister of Defense of Ukraine. And I asked him how things are going. He said, well, we did what you told us to do. I said, what did we tell you to do? He said, you told us to give up Crimea. And so I called the Russian general who was in charge. We knew each other from the time that we were in the Red Army in East Germany in the 1980s when we were lieutenants. And this man was a colonel general at this point, 3-star. And he said, I told him, we're leaving. You can have the equipment. Please don't hurt our troops. You told us to do that. I couldn't believe it. After Bosnia, after the problems in Yugoslavia, where we told the Bosnians they couldn't defend themselves and kept them from having weapons, now we did it again. And the United States sort of covered it up publicly at the time, said, oh, that was Angela Merkel. It wasn't Angela Merkel. It was the United States government. We gave away Crimea. We didn't support and follow through with our obligations. Why not? Because, well, it was different, and the people who did it in 94 weren't around, and the world looked different, and we wanted to work with Putin. And as the Obama administration said, don't provoke Putin. Oh, give him some room. So, Stan, that's why we're where we are today. We could have stopped this at the beginning. In fact, we could have stopped it in 2008 when he invaded Georgia. And that was under the Bush administration. But we didn't stop it. Instead, we sent the French president in to form a weak ceasefire agreement without U.S. backing. We keep turning away from Europe, and yet Europe is the greatest investor in the United States collectively. Europe is the greatest trading partner collectively, bigger than Mexico, bigger than Canada, bigger than China. Europe, 500 and some odd million people. And we've turned our back on them. And we could have helped them out during the austerity period, when we could have really leaned on them and said, you must not do austerity. We know from experience that in an economic crisis, you must spend your way out of it, not cut expenses. That goes back to the Depression in the United States. But Germany, of course, and the German economists and the German businessmen, they didn't live through the Depression. That was the period in which they turned to Adolf Hitler. And so Germany was rearming during this period that the United States was struggling with its depression. We learned the lessons. The Germans hadn't learned those lessons. And so for political reasons in Germany and for ways that we just said, look, this is too complicated, and let them figure it out for themselves. We turned our back on Europe. And if you want to manage China, if you want to deal with the problems of the world, you must have allies. Europe is the group of people that are most bound to the United States, closest to us culturally, and have the longest relationships with the United States. You cannot reestablish NATO in the Pacific. You can't do it. You may love Japan and Korea, but they're busy trading with China. You may love Indonesia, but Indonesia's got to stay neutral. You may love Australia, but it's a small part of the Indo-Pacific and with a small population. As the Chinese told me once, you have an alliance, they said, speaking of the United States, with Singapore. Singapore, it's a tiny island. They were laughing at us. And so we have to understand the geopolitics of this. The Transatlantic Alliance is fundamental to America's economic welfare as well as our national security.
Thank you, General. You spoke of the numerous attempts by successive U.S. administration to engage with Russia on a number of topics. I want to maybe press the issue a little more. In 1931, Mahatma Gandhi famously said, quote, "The best way of arriving at the solution to any problem is for the protagonists of rival views to meet one another and talk things out with sincerity and candor," end quote. In the 8 years President Obama was at the White House, he met with President Putin 9 times. In Trump's first term, he held 6 in-person meetings with Putin, and since the beginning of his second term, the two met once in Anchorage and spoke 8 times over the phone. President Biden met President Putin once as vice president in 2011 and once as president in late 2021. And President Zelensky met President Putin only once in 2019 in Paris. British Member of Parliament Tony Blaine said, "War is the ultimate failure of diplomacy." In keeping with the spirit of these two quotes, do you think this war could have been prevented with greater direct engagement between President Putin and his American and Ukrainian counterparts in the month leading to the start of the war? And do you personally believe it is a form of appeasement or abdication on the part of President Trump to engage with his Russian counterpart as he has in recent months?
No, I'm all in favor of talking. I think that has to, but the thing is, Stan, it's very hard when you're a successful political leader in the West, and you're dealing from a certain background and a certain set of experiences, and you have a lot of confidence that you can talk to people and persuade them, because that's how you rose to the top in your political system, whatever system that was, and then you meet someone like Putin, and he knows. He responds. Looks like you're on the same wavelength. But what you don't appreciate, and if you're too close to it, you can't see it, is the continuing sense of struggle that has been imparted into Russia. It was there during the Tsar's period, but it was intensified by Vladimir Lenin in the 1920s. When he created the Communist International, and when he frankly recognized that communism cannot live in one country alone. It has to have other countries buffering it against the capitalist powers. And he established, under Lenin, there was Cheka and the internal security mechanism, and then it's the Communist International. They went overseas, and they're extremely successful, and they have long memories and great files. And as when the first problems emerged in 2022 with Ukrainians said, "Read the statements. They're exactly like what the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was." They go back to the files. In the United States, we put new people in office every 2 or 4 years. The young people become deputy assistant secretaries and assistant secretaries, and they've been to the greatest schools in America, most cases, not always, but and they've had some experience, maybe students abroad, maybe they were lieutenants in the Army or something, and maybe they worked on the Hill, and they come in full of determination and ideals, but they don't come in with the full weight of understanding what everybody in all their predecessors did, thought, and learned. They don't. Because of the democratic system, they often wash it away. As Condoleezza Rice said when friends in the White House told her after the election of George W. Bush in 2000, he took office in 2001, and people said, you got a real problem with terrorism and Osama bin Laden, and she reportedly said, I wasn't there to hear it, but she reportedly said, that's the Clinton problem. We don't have that problem. What Condi told me before they were elected was that you people ruin the relationship with Russia. We're going to work with Russia. And so, there's always this sense of a fresh start and greater idealism. And what happens is that when you have the dialogue and you approach it as the leader of the free world or as a democratically elected leader, you approach it with fresh eyes. But the person you're talking to does not have fresh eyes. He knows exactly what he wants. And in the United States and the West, we talk about the difference between peace and war. It's like light and dark. It's like day and night. It's like the sun's up, the sun's down. In reality, that's not the way it's seen by, let's say, Russia or China. They see it as a period of struggle. Sometimes the struggle is economic, sometimes the struggle is diplomatic, sometimes the struggle uses military force. As the Chinese told me when they invaded Vietnam in 1979, they did so to change Vietnamese attitudes. They didn't do it to conquer territory. They want a different attitude. I mean, really? The United States, we never think like that. It's just a different way of looking at the world, Stan. So yes, I'm all in favor of dialogue. I think it's important. Talk as often as you like, but understand you're talking to someone who may use common words, but behind those words is a different context and a different objective. For them, it's struggle. For us, it's war versus peace.
Thank you, General. I have one last question on Ukraine, and I am going to probably abuse of your time a little, few more minutes, because I did want to touch upon the Western Hemisphere. Will there be a resolution, in your view, on the Ukraine front in 2026, and how might that impact President Trump's prospects for the midterms?
Really hard to say. We know that the Russian economy is hurting. We also know that Putin has, as I've said earlier, long ambitions to take over Ukraine and press it on Europe. And he's a very formidable person. He's very smart. He's very determined. He's the senior statesman in the world today. He has a lot of resources behind him. He doesn't talk about the economy the way we do. He's not worried about public opinion the way we are. So I think he's going to continue to press on. If he gets what he wants through a cessation of fighting and Ukraine were to give up its hold on Donbass, but really it's not about Donbass, you understand, Stan? He doesn't really care that much about Donbass. What he really wants is an issue that will break the Ukrainian government and destroy its credibility, its legitimacy in the eyes of the Ukrainian people. That's what Donbass is about. It's only secondarily about the territory. And of course, he understands President Trump likes finances and money, and so he puts his economists and his businessmen forward to deal with people like Witkoff and Kushner because they speak the language. But that's not what Putin is after. He's after the collapse of Ukraine and regaining control of it, using that to then pull Belarus in, and then using that to regain Moldova, take over Georgia completely, and handle the Baltic states. So who knows how this is going to work out. One thing I can tell you is the Ukrainian military is not eager to stop fighting. I mean, they'd love to have success, but they're not going to agree to give up that territory. They know what the consequences would be. So they're going to continue to fight. So I don't think President Zelensky has freedom to do everything that President Trump would like him to do. And that's probably a good thing for the security of Europe.
Moving quickly to the Western Hemisphere, as the national security strategy indicates a pivot to South America and the Western Hemisphere to secure its immediate sphere of influence. We see several South American countries moving back to the conservative pendulum. In Argentina, in Chile, in Honduras, El Salvador has become a staunch ally and a new strategic partner to the Trump administration under President Bukele. Caudillismo, this form of strong leadership specific to South America, seems to be back in fashion. This year, Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica, Peru, and Haiti will hold elections. Two of those countries, Brazil and Colombia, are staunch left-leaning governments. Do you anticipate a pendulum shift back to conservative governments in those countries?
It's hard to be certain exactly what the United States is doing and will do. Certainly the threats directed against Colombia's president and the idea that there could be some kind of economic and military action against Colombia, which has been one of our longest allies and friends in this hemisphere. that will have an impact on the election. The pressure on Brazil, the meddling by President Trump in the Supreme Court decision to imprison Bolsonaro, that might have a reverse impact on the election. But you know, when you look at these countries in South America, and I was the commander down there, 96, 97 in the U.S. Southern Command, I went to every country, met the political leaders, learned the history, met the military. These countries do swing back and forth from socialist orientation back to a military leader. And then it goes back the other way. I talked to many military leaders, and they explained it this way. They said, what would happen is something's wrong in the government. There are demonstrations, there are problems. They come to the military, they say, General, only you can save us. And of course, the generals don't understand the economics, the politics, the power structure. They're not, most of them, of the same social class as the top people. They're not pure Castilians or pure Portuguese leaders in these countries. They haven't been educated abroad to the same extent that the top people have. They don't have the same relations economically and socially. And so after 6 months, 9 months, 18 months, the generals screw it up. And then they're thrown out again. And but they've done what they thought they could do. They've been repressive, and they've done other things. I mean, we've seen this cycle go back and forth. We've seen right-wing military leadership. We've seen left-wing military leadership. We've seen right-wing repression through harsh power. We've seen left-wing repression. And in the middle, there's a period in most of these countries where there's some form of democracy. But the combination of history, culture, economics makes it hard for these countries to be stable financially and to deal with the resultant social issues, political issues that emerge from maldistribution of wealth and income. And it creates a sort of inherent instability. And that's what we're witnessing now.
Thank you. Mercury rising on the Orinoco belt. Where do you see the chips fall as relates to Venezuela? And what, in your opinion, is really driving this increase in sort of rhetoric towards regime change? Is the real threat narcotics, the thirst for oil, or pushing our adversaries out of the region?
I think it's all a combination of those three. I think it is about our adversaries. It's be nice to get a better regime in Maduro. It would be great to have a more democratic government in Venezuela. It would be nice to be able to restore the full degree of trade and interrelationship. Venezuela has always been very close to the United States. I was there in 1996. I remember talking to the Minister of the Economy who told me he was going on vacation. I said, well, what are you going to do? I mean, you're going to go like to Europe and you're going to go diving in the Caribbean. What do you do on vacations? We go to Miami to shop. And this was the 1990s. This is Venezuela. I lived in Panama for a year. These countries have always been historically very close to the United States. So it'd be great to have Venezuela able to be close to the United States again. But what is the objective? I think it's a combination of the three. And I think it's also a measure of President Trump saying, I'm not going to live forever. I want this done. I want us out of Europe, away from Russia. Putin's somebody, I understand him. I'd like to work with Russia. He's still sort of captivated by the old mystique and the romanticism. And I can see a series of hotels across Russia, great tourist locations and everything across the Ural Mountains and into the Siberia and so forth. The great rivers out there, tours, and I mean, all of this is a great vision, but it's in my view a little premature. Russia has to come to terms with the Enlightenment. It has to move into sort of understanding of the dignity of the individual and away from the statist philosophy. And so, but the president has his vision, and this is what's being implemented. And so we've got 25% of the U.S. fleet in the Caribbean. I don't know what we're going to do with them. But if Maduro leaves, it'll be viewed as a success for the United States and for the United States government. I think that's good if he leaves. But I think Maduro is like a mosquito compared to the threat of Putin unleashed in Europe.
Thank you. We're going to close this conversation with a topic that is dear to both our hearts. You have singular experience with the nation of Haiti, having traveled there many a times over the last 30 years in your numerous capacity, including as U.S. Southcom Commander. More recently, you've traveled there as a private citizen to offer your help with the previous administrations of I. Henry and Gary Coney to advise on how to address gang violence. Yet most of the weapons coming into the country and fueling this gang war are coming from the United States. What has Washington gotten wrong over the years with the first Black Republic in the world? And will this new gang suppression force succeed where other missions have failed? Is democracy a viable path against this complete institutional collapse and lawlessness, or does Haiti need an exception to the UAS Hemispheric Democratic Charter until it can regain some stability? It's a lot of questions in one.
I can answer all those questions, but I would say this, that Haiti is, there are a number of Haitians who live in the United States and Canada. And we always think of Haiti as a poor nation, but these are wealthy people and they make a lot of their money in Haiti. So there's a tremendous expat influence on Haiti. And it is culturally and linguistically isolated within the hemisphere as the only Francophone country, really significant group here in the hemisphere, and then isolated more by the lack of education and the reliance on Creole rather than French as a common language down there. So I think it makes it difficult for the people of Haiti. But these are wonderful people with a wonderful tradition, a wonderful culture, and I love them when I go down there and I meet people. I look at the art, and I'll never forget the man who came up to me when I was going through the slums in Cité Soleil. It was dark, no street lights. And he reached out and wanted to shake hands, and he asked me to put him in my plane and take him to the United States. He'd come from the interior. He'd come to the city. He wanted to live in a country that was free and where he could afford to buy an automobile. He was 23 years old, didn't have much education, but he had ambition, and he had a vision and a dream. To me, he'll always represent the people of Haiti. I think we can do a lot better job in giving them the support they need and helping them to move into the 21st century of democracy and integration in the hemisphere. But they have to do it for themselves. We have to provide the resources, maybe some ideas, but there are plenty of Haitian Americans and Haitian Canadians who can go back and help lead that country if they will, and I hope they will.
Thank you so much, General. This concludes our program today. I want to thank you again for having shared your wisdom and statesmanship, your breadth of experience with our viewers today as we try to make sense of the world around us. We hope to welcome you again very soon in our geopolitical bunker for another episode of Pièces de Résistance, and I wish you happy holidays to you, to your family, and to all our viewers, wherever they may be watching.
Thank you, Stan. Good to be with you.
Pleasure.
Great, how do you feel?